Greetings! I'm Hal Meng with the Center for Food Preservation Arts, and we're really excited to be starting this collaboration with Food is Free on their FIG food preservation courses. The goal is to provide information and a little self-confidence for folks to be doing canning at home or with community canning parties. In order to take full advantage of the harvest and also to help reduce food waste. And so in this series, we're going to be starting with applesauce. Why applesauce? Well, this is Washington, and apples are very abundant. And so that makes them a local product, inexpensive, and they're very easy to work with. It can be used in 100 different recipes, replacing fats or sugars, and you can also eat it just right out of the jar. Now, we're going to have a lot of information, and there's a lot of other resources that we're going to give you a link to in the description. So let's go ahead and start with a few of what they would call frequently asked questions that I always get about applesauce. The first question is, what's the difference between applesauce and apple butter? And the simple answer is time. Apple butter is just applesauce that's been cooked down long enough that a lot of the moisture has moved out, and so it's concentrated. Often it gets a little bit caramelized, but it turns into a nice smooth spread. Also, apple butter usually has more spices in it, like cloves or cinnamon or ginger and nutmeg. The second question is, what kind of apples should I use? And the simple answer to that one is, whatever's available. But the best would be a mixture of the sweetest apples moving down to the more tart. And so just as an example, here are some Fuji's, Honeycrisp, Red Delicious. This is an opal. You could also use a yellow transparent apple or even a yellow delicious. And then of course the most tart, the Granny Smith. And any of these apples, whether you're going to be using them in sauce or whether you're going to just be eating them, should always be washed thoroughly, but then also soaked in a solution. And the solution that we like to use is a solution of white vinegar with water. And the ratio is about 1 cup of white vinegar to 2 quarts of water. Now, this higher acidity makes it harder for the bacteria to reproduce. And so it's easier to get rid of them when you peel them. Now, another question is, can I use frozen apples? I usually end up with way more apples than what I can deal with at one time. And of course you can freeze them. And they freeze very well. You can freeze them whole, but then that often has a bit of a problem when you go to try to peel them or core them, and you're not going to be able to get any kind of slices out of frozen apples. So you need to kind of take a look at what you're going to be making with them. So mostly I make applesauce, and so I tend to cut them, peel them, core them, cut them up, and then freeze them. And you want to be sure that you always treat them with some lemon juice so that it will slow down the browning. Now these were frozen, and if I'd got them right into the pot, they'd still be nice and white, but unfortunately they've completely defrosted and been sitting here for a little while. So they've changed colors a bit. So if you're going to make just a small batch of applesauce and you choose to peel the apples, which I always do, that would be sufficient just to use a hand peeler and a knife. But if you're going to be doing a lot of apples, like quarts and quarts of applesauce, this is one of the sweetest devices to get. It's a combination apple corer, peeler, and slicer. And on Amazon right now, there are very good models available for under $29. The thing you want to look for is to make sure that it's a cast iron, because those are very sturdy and last a long time. And there's still models out there that are the screw that screw up into the base of a table or a counter. But what really is more versatile is to get one that has this suction base. You want to put down a little bit of water, and then it will attach very well to any smooth counter, like a granite countertop or metal. Now, it looks kind of complicated, and when it comes in the box, it comes in pieces. But we have a video on the Center for Food Preservation Arts channel where we basically do an unpacking and put it together. But just talking about it here, the main parts of it are, of course, the crank that moves the apples in, and then this part, which is the corer, but also the slicer, and then there is the peeler. And if you choose not to peel your apples, but you still want them sliced and cored, you can lock this back so that it doesn't peel. So it's really pretty simple. You can release it, bring that back, put the apple on, and then you just start cranking it. And we'll do another one. And this moves back and forth so you can get it started. One of the important things is to remember to not stop in the middle of it, because that will kind of cause a little bit of issue with it. Now, once you get your apples done, you can make them in slices and freeze them, or you can cut them up into this size. So when you have the apples all cut to a smaller size, you need to cut them down. There are a couple of ways to do that. Certainly there's stovetop with just a regular kettle, but then also, especially if you're making apple butter, you may want to use a crock pot, because low and slow, low heat, slow a long time, works a little bit better because it's very easy to lose track and scorch the applesauce, especially as it's turning into butter and it starts to concentrate. The sugars will scorch very quickly. In either case, if you're cooking it down over a period of time, and especially with a kettle, it makes splatter, but with a crock pot also, to just prop the lid up a bit, which allows the steam to escape. And so storing the applesauce, there's a number of different ways. It'll store in a container, in the refrigerator, easily for a week, but probably no more than a week. Then, if you freeze it, they recommend about 6 months, but I have some stuff in the freezer that's still perfectly edible, as long as it's well sealed so that it doesn't get freezer burn on the top of it. You could keep it a lot longer. And then, of course, there's water bath canned. And we'll go through some of that process here also. But it's good, they recommend, for optimum flavor and nutrition for about a year. But a lot of the stuff can stay, especially if it's higher acid, like applesauce is, can stay maybe 3 years or more. I usually look at my stocks as a 3-year rotation. So 1 year I'll make a lot of applesauce and know I have 3 years to go through that. Then I'll pressure can green beans, things like that. Now what we've done is these were already done a little bit earlier. And then we've got our pot ready over here. Now, they come in bigger sizes, and you can use those on one of these induction burners. But if you're just doing small batches of like maybe 6 pints or up to 8 half pints, you can get one of these smaller ones if they're back in stock now. They all come with some kind of a rack because you don't want the jars to ever sit directly on the bottom of the kettle. It causes uneven heating and it might cause the bottoms to crack some. So we'll go ahead and get those in there. And then we'll go ahead and use this that we had cooked up a little bit earlier to fill these jars. And there's some basic tools that you're going to need, and they will come in kits with all these different pieces. And they're not that expensive, but certainly a funnel. And then you want to get a kit that has one of these. It's to help you remove bubbles when you get something like applesauce in there. But also it has a graduated scale on it because every canned product needs to have what's called a specific headroom. And headroom is the amount of air that's in there, and it's the amount of air that can be expelled during the established cooking time. And it's the expelling of that air that causes the vacuum that sucks the lids down. So for example, applesauce is a 1/2 inch headspace. So it's going to be to that mark there. I don't know how well that shows. But after you've done this a good number of times, you get used to it. And a 1/2 inch is right about between these two threads on almost all jars. Another very useful is this rack because they will encourage you to heat the lids up a little bit. Used to say they used to have you boil them, but that's no longer necessary. In fact, that's even bad for them. And there's a jar lifter. So if this was nice and hot when we fill it, the jar is going to be very warm. And so it's good to pick it up with these. So once you're ready, go ahead. Oh, and I love this ladle because you can pour it in 3 different directions. It will also hang on the pot. And it's relatively inexpensive. The first one was given to me as a gift, and it was, like $15. But they've come down in price a whole lot. I'm good. I'm really good. I've done this about 100 times, so. And this ladle will hold roughly 1 cup. So it helps you to estimate where you are in the process. And it's of a shape that you almost never need to use a spatula. And one thing you always want to do, especially if these are hot, is never set it directly on a metal surface or something like marble, because you'll end up with the possibility of getting stress fractures. And that's like when the whole bottom will drop off. So that's pretty close. And then what you'll want to do is you want to make sure that especially the very top is clean, because you don't want to trap any particles. And you want to finger tight. And if you are of a certain age, you can remember when they'd throw up a baseball bat and you get to the top and it'd be like bottle cap, eagle claws. So you want to kind of eagle claw this. If you really crank it down and get it too tight, then there's no fluctuation, even though the rubber is kind of warm, and that's what allows the air to escape. But if you crank it too much, then the air can't come out, and you'll end up with a lot of jars where it's bulging lids. And that may seal or it may not seal. If you end up with jars that don't seal after 6 to 12 hours, put them in the refrigerator, or if you really need to, you could reprocess them and basically start all over again. So if these were warm, you pick them up, put them in the canner. If you don't have one of the kind of these racks, but you have a different rack, you can use this and just set them directly in. And you want about 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water over the top. And then you bring it up to temperature. And with applesauce, most of the recipes will recommend about 15 minutes, but it has to be timed from when the water is fully boiling for the 15 minutes. At the end of the 15, you turn the heat off entirely and let it sit for 5 minutes because it's sucking the lid back down. And then you want to leave it, take them out, set them on a surface and leave them undisturbed for 6 to 12 hours to make sure they seal. Now, one of the wonderful things about applesauce, and in some of the resource material we have, it has a lot of links to different recipes. There's all kinds of things you can do with applesauce. You can use it as a substitute for fats in recipes, especially like in muffins. You can use it as a substitute for sweeteners, a glaze for hams and other meat, smoothies. Applesauce is often the basis for making fruit leathers. You mix other berries with it. We have recipes for that too. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope that you'll check out all the reference and resource material we have. And I look forward to the remaining 5 classes in this series.